Welcome everybody to our progress report about AIMS, the Alliance for IP Media Solutions. With us today we have Steve Reynolds. Steve is president of Imagine Communications and is also the chairman of AIMS, which is again the Alliance for IP Media Solutions. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Wes. Glad to be here at the IP Showcase. Thanks everybody for joining us today. The topic for this presentation is going to be a progress report for 2022 on the Alliance for IP Media Solutions. AIMS was founded in 2015, and it was a group of companies from the supplier side, from the distributor and programmer side, and also systems integrators that all came together to try to form an alliance around the adoption of IP media solutions, and in particular, the set of SMPTE standards that were being worked on at that time to create an open and interoperable environment around IP media. The mission statement of AIMS has not changed since 2015. The goal and the objective of this organization is to foster the adoption of one set of common, ubiquitous, standards-based protocols for interoperability over IP for the media and entertainment industry. The members of AIMS, as you can see, are made up of companies that provide technology to the broadcast industry. You'll see a couple of logos up there of large programmers and broadcasters that actually use this technology, as well as systems integrators that do the design work and implementation work around IP media solutions. Here at NAB 2022, one of the focal points for AIMS is actually to be a part of the IP Showcase. We've brought a number of different elements into this booth. You can see some of it as you walk around here, including updates to the roadmap for AIMS, update to the roadmap for IPMX, and then on the backside of this pod, there's actually a wall that shows individual tiles for the IP projects that are being implemented around the world. I think that's a really key element of what we're here at NAB to talk about, the fact that these IP technologies, and in particular SMPTE 2110, have been adopted and built into these IP facilities and these new IP projects on the basis of those standards having become significantly mature. So these are now standards that are out in the market. People are using them to build and design real solutions, and there's IP implementation work going on all around the planet. So if you get a chance, wander around the back of this pod and you can take a look at all of those different tiles that talk about the examples of the AIMS technology being put into practice in the real world. Let me talk a little bit about the standards that make up the AIMS roadmap. As I mentioned, when we originally launched AIMS in 2015, a lot of these standards were still in development. As you can see now, all of the main standards that are a part of our roadmap are stable and continue to be evolved by organizations such as SMPTE and AMWA. But the fundamental technologies are all stable and published and implemented in working equipment and working systems. The AIMS roadmap, which is shown at the bottom of the slide here, has also not changed materially since we started the AIMS project back in 2015. We do have conversations frequently about what needs to be added to this roadmap, and I'm going to touch on a couple of specific things as I move through the presentation. Within AIMS, there are several different working groups that actually look at the different aspects of adoption. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is the TWG, the Technology Working Group. This is a working group inside of the AIMS Alliance that focuses on maintaining that roadmap that I just showed you. A couple of the things that they're looking at right now and that we'll continue to report on as this work evolves, they're considering bringing ISO 8 into the AIMS roadmap. ISO 8 is the specification for audio within that kind of an IP media environment. Another major topic of conversation is creating a set of guidelines around design standards. One of the really great things about having so many projects that are now live is that we have learned a lot. There are best practices that are emerging in the area of IP design and operations, and so our technical working group is looking across all of the projects and all of the members to try to identify guidelines that we can normalize and standardize around. And then the big topic of technical conversation is around systemization. What I mean by that is providing tools that allow operators and engineers to see the entire IP media solution from end to end. So everything from commissioning to configuration to operations and monitoring, creating systems that can actually be used to make these technologies more practical and more scalable as they move out into the real world. The other important thing that the technical working group does is that they continuously review the progress that's being made by the SDOs that are part of our ecosystem. So AIMS is not a standards development organization. AIMS is effectively a marketing alliance that brings companies together. So we work very closely with the SDOs. We work with SMPTE, AES, the IETF, the Video Services Forum, and of course with AMWA. And as their development of standards and specifications moves forward, our technical working group is a part of that conversation. A big piece of what AIMS does is brings use cases to these other groups to say, hey, here's something that that the SDO organizations need to take a look at because it's something that the user community would like to see standardized. And then the other thing we talk with these guys about is gaps. So as we build real world projects around the AIMS technology, inevitably there are things that we identify that need to be addressed in the standards and in the specs. And so the AIMS technical working group will write those up, talk about them among our membership, and then advance those into the SDOs for consideration of how the standards or how the specifications need to be modified or augmented in order to support these new emerging use cases. Another working group inside the AIMS Alliance is the Education Working Group. Now this is a new initiative that AIMS actually started up just at the end of last year. We added this new top-level working group to really focus on what you see here as the mission statement. We felt that this was necessary because one piece of feedback that we get very commonly from the market is that there just aren't enough qualified professionals to design, build, and operate these IP-based media solutions. So our EWG was formed to help define what is needed to establish that foundation of shared knowledge. How do we bring together all the lessons learned? How do we bring together everything that the community is doing around making these standards more practical and more effective, and bring that in so that everyone can share those learnings? We do that because we seek to remove barriers to entry. We want to bring more people, more engineers, more operators, more designers into this IP media community. And the goal is to expand that base of professionals rapidly so that our industry can meet the growing demand for IP media solutions. The activities that our Education Working Group has undertaken, the first thing that they did was they defined that mission statement that you saw on the previous slide, but then they moved immediately into a conversation about who is this for? Identifying the personas that we want to create educational materials for and that we want to work with other organizations to build training and certification programs around. And then we also undertook building a library of educational content. Since we initially launched AIMS at IBC back in 2015, there's been a lot of material created. Some of that is specifically training material. Some of it are webinars that were put together and during the course of the pandemic, that was the primary means of communications and training where we were doing knowledge sharing. And some of it has come in from other organizations, such as SMPTE, or from our member organizations, where they've contributed training material about either specific technical topics or about lessons that have been learned as we've done the initial couple years of implementation of SMPTE 2110 projects. The next set of challenges that the EWG is going to tackle is to create a library of searchable metadata so that if someone is coming into the IP media arena, or even for people that have already been doing work and they're looking for advanced knowledge about new topics, they'll have a way to search all of the material that's already been created, find the right video, find the right webinar, find the right white paper to be able to get answers to their questions. The other thing that the EWG is doing is that they're working very closely with our partner organizations, the VSF, AMWA, AES, the EBU, and SMPTE, to to survey all of the materials that's available from those organizations and integrate it into our comprehensive library of training materials. By the way, if you're interested, the EWG does have a page on the AIMS Alliance website, aimsalliance.org, and you can actually go and look at all of the materials that they've already reviewed and see what kind of training and information is up there if you're interested in learning more. It's all broken into chapters and categories so that the information is much better organized for someone who's new to the AIMS activities. The other subgroup that we have is an audio subgroup. So within AIMS, this is a group of companies that focuses specifically on topics related to audio within these IP media solutions. This forum, this subgroup, deals with both technical and marketing topics. So they're specifically looking at the challenges that designers, integrators, and operators are facing as audio moves into this kind of a fully IP world. That group just recently was involved in publishing a white paper called AES 67 Beyond the LAN. A lot of great information in that white paper talking about best practices for using AES 67 across wide area networks. And they've also been working with the IPMX group. So IPMX is an initiative that was started a couple of years ago to take the AIMS technology, all of that SMPTE 2110 technology, and actually move it into the Pro AV segment as well. So not just for broadcast, but also for Pro AV. And so our audio subgroup collaborates very closely with the IPMX subgroup. And then, of course, that AIMS audio subgroup is also contributing to the work that's being done with creating the education library. Audio is a big area of both development as well as deployment, and so we want to make sure that all the lessons that are being learned with IP over audio are being collected and reflected in the AIMS education library. I mentioned the Pro AV subgroup. This is the group that's been working primarily on IPMX. This group does function as a subgroup of our marketing working group. And the intention of the Pro AV group is to provide that forum for companies that are more in the Pro AV space to talk about how to utilize the set of standards that are represented on the AIMS roadmap. Pro AV has really become an area of rapid acceleration within the use of IP. So as enterprise and Pro AV applications move more towards IP and move more towards using cloud technologies, there's a real need for the work that this group does in order to bridge between that set of AIMS standards, which are broadly adopted in the broadcast industry, and move them into that more Pro AV and prosumer space. The set of standards that we're using for that IPMX work, largely based on what was already in the AIMS roadmap, but because the use cases and in fact some of the design constraints that segment of the industry faces, they're very different than what you might find in a typical broadcast facility. So there was some work that had to be done in order to create a set of technical recommendations for how to use the base standards of SMPTE 2110 and AES 67 and move those into this more this lighter weight Pro AV space. So there's a set of standards that's listed here. You can see what's been adopted from the original AIMS roadmap, and you can see the technical recommendations that have been added in on top of that, really focused specifically on what IPMX is doing. I mentioned that we've started to see a lot of momentum growing towards IPMX, and so I just wanted to kind of graphically depict that for you. When we first started the IPMX work, back in 2018, it was a small set of standards and a small set of companies that were working together on that. But every year since then, we've made more and more progress of adding to that roadmap and also of attracting more companies. We've had a number of new companies join AIMS, and in fact, the most recent one was Barco. They joined just before the NAB show. And the reason that these companies are moving towards AIMS is because they see the growth of adoption with this IPMX roadmap, moving these media over IP technologies into that Pro AV space, moving them into the enterprise space, the house of worship, concert production, things like that, and just continuing along that progression. And of course, as the chairman of AIMS, I also wanted to make sure we did a good job of marketing, so I picked a couple of quotes that came out of some of the key publications around the industry to really highlight the excitement, the adoption, and the advantages that these companies see in adopting that AIMS roadmap and bringing the set of standards that AIMS originally had on our roadmap into a brand new space. Very exciting for all of our members to be able to expand the base of users and also to expand the base of technologies as we move forward. So if you want to learn more about AIMS, here's the website. Please go to aimsalliance.org. Take a look at what we've been doing with interfacing with the standards development organizations, take a look at what we've been contributing into that education library, and please also take a little bit of time to learn more about IPMX and how that represents kind of the next horizon of what AIMS is going to be doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We have time for a few questions. Matt, here we go.
I don't see any relation to education. I mean, why don't you tell the universities, with film schools, what you need?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, we are already working with HETMA, which is the kind of the alliance around, or the industry organization around higher education. So HETMA is already involved with the work that we're doing around IPMX. And so I think you will start to see some of that moving into more of a university and higher education area. There's also been quite a lot of work done around the SMPTE 2110 standards interfacing with higher education. And in fact, there's a couple of large universities here in the US. Texas A&M is an example. UNC down in North Carolina is another example where they have actually brought these SMPTE 2110 technologies onto their campus. So they're building campus video networks using SMPTE 2110 and teaching their students how to use these kinds of IP solutions to build the future of media. So great question. I should have brought that up. Thanks for asking it.
I just had one maybe for the audience here. What do people need to do to become an AIMS member?
If you go to the AIMS website, and again, aimsalliance.org, you can actually see everything that's required in order to join the organization. It's a very transparent organization. Our bylaws are published on our website. The membership forms are available for anybody to see. You don't need an NDA or anything like that to go and review all that material. We do invite people to join AIMS in two different membership categories. There's what we call a full member. Full members are able to participate in the governance of the organization. And then there are associate members who are people that want to contribute to the working groups, the TWG, the EWG, or the MWG, which is the marketing working group. So if you want to join to participate in the working groups but aren't necessarily interested in being part of the governance of the organization, you can join as an associate member. So we as I mentioned earlier, we have about 75 members now, and that continues to broaden as the use cases continue to broaden across the industry. So if you're interested, please take a look at the membership tab on the website. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope that was useful and informative.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to seeing the progress at next year's event.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you. Take care.